So you've been wondering, what do I need to start making music? Or as the hip hop people will say, making beats. I wish someone made a video just like this when I started 10 years ago. So if you're going through any kind of information overload, I could relate with you. I was there, not knowing what to buy, not knowing where to start. Everything just feels confusing. Well, luckily for you, this video is going to put it all in layman's terms for you. The way I structured the video is from the most important gear to the least important gear. I also include all the links of all the recommendations I give you guys in the description below. Make sure you use that link so you could also get your own discount. And also stick around to the end and I'll give you guys my #1 thing I wish I knew when I started making music. The very first gear you need, the most important out of all this, it's your brain. I know, crazy. You wouldn't have expected me to put that as a gear, right? Because that's a body function, I get it. But that's actually one of your most vital gear. In my opinion, instead of spending on all the equipment and thinking that you need to buy or have certain equipments just to make your music sound better, I'm here to tell you, you are 100% wrong. So don't worry about what any producer or songwriter is ever using in the studio. If you just focus on the main important thing and just focus on quality education, books and materials, you will do just fine even without the gear. In my opinion, you could walk in the studio and use anything and still be able to make a hit. The second most important gear you need is a computer. Now, something very, very important I'm gonna say here. Do not join the computer war. It makes no sense. It does not matter whether you go Mac or Windows, the music is gonna sound the same. Now, there are some specifics that I do recommend minimum your computer should have. If you decide to do the Apple route, I recommend you do the MacBook Pros or the iMac or anything of the Pro line. That should be well more than enough to handle your processing needs, especially as a beginner. If you decide to go the Windows route, minimum you should have 16 gigs of RAM. When it comes to the hard drive, I recommend you do an SSD, which just stands for solid state drive. It's just a drive that is ultra fast. And so when you click something, it loads up pretty quick. Essentially, that's what an SSD does. And make sure it has a minimum of 250 gigabytes at least. But if you can, I would upgrade that to over 500 or at least 1 terabyte. And you should not have any problems with storing things on your computer. When it comes to the processor, there are two main companies. There's Intel and there's AMD. If you're doing Intel, any of their i-lines, so the i5, the i7, the i9 should work as well. And when it comes to the AMD, anything 3000 series and up, you should be fine as well. And when it comes to the graphics card, this doesn't really matter so much on music production, so just anything that comes with the laptop should be fine. The third thing you're gonna need is a DAW. A DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, which is just a fancy way of saying music software. Why don't they make our lives easy? We're already suffering trying to figure this out. The software is what you're going to use to create music. So that comes from the recording, to mixing it, to mastering it, to make it sound so good, playing your music in, all that. That's the point of a music software. There are different types of music softwares available in the market. Now, just like the computer war, there's unfortunately also a software war, which don't get into that, but I am going to give you guys recommendations of the 4 most popular softwares. More likely, if you go to a studio session, one of these 4 is going to be mentioned. The first one, which is what I personally use, is Ableton Live. The second one, which I also use, is Pro Tools. The third one is Logic Pro. I used to use that. And the last one, which I have dabbled into, is Fruity Loops. So how do you know which one to pick out of the 4? Well, I recommend just downloading demos of each and just see which one comes natural to you. There are some softwares that might feel a little weird on their workflow and the others just come so easy. Now, I am going to say that some genres tend to lean towards certain softwares. For example, Fruity Loops tends to have more hip hop people. Ableton tends to have more pop and EDM music. Does not mean you can't produce hip hop, because I do it. Logic tends to have just a bunch of randoms. Logic tends to also have more pop and also EDM, a little bit of hip hop, but not so much. And when it comes to Pro Tools, it's more widely accepted in the industry, so almost all genres use it, but it's mainly used for recording, mastering, and mixing, not so much of production. You can produce in it, but it's a really small amount of people that do. Now, I am gonna make a recommendation that you should learn at least 2. One of them is gonna be by default, which is gonna be Pro Tools. So that means you could pick either Ableton, Logic, or Fruity Loops out of the 3, but Pro Tools you should at least know. As you move up in your music career and become more professional, you're gonna see Pro Tools a lot of times because that's the industry standard for recording. So you should be able to at least know the basics of Pro Tools, but out of the other three, you could use to produce. The fourth thing you're gonna need are headphones. Now don't think you got those already, like the Bose, the AirPods, or the Beats. These aren't music production headphones. Now, it doesn't mean you can't produce in them. It's just not recommended because you're gonna get a distorted sound. Because super headphones tend to have a boost on the low end and the high end. Now, you don't want any of that when you're producing. You just want a flat frequency so you get the true sound of what you're doing. I've tried many music production headphones, and to be honest, I've only liked two of them. The first one is the ATH M50X, and the second one is the Sony 7506. So far, we've covered half of the most important gear you need. With just the first four, you should be well equipped to start making music. The last four I talk about are actually just as important, but you could add them slowly with time as your budget allows. The fifth thing you need is a MIDI keyboard. A MIDI just stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. This is just another fancy way of saying a keyboard. Now, there are other types of MIDI keyboards that comes with sounds in them, and those are usually called synthesizers because they could be standalone, meaning you literally just have the keyboard, you could go anywhere with it, you could perform live with it, and it has sounds. Whereas a MIDI keyboard that has no sounds, you have to plug it into your music software, load an instrument, and then you could play with that keyboard. Now, the cool thing about having a MIDI keyboard, you could play virtually any sound. You could literally play the guitar with the keyboard. You could obviously play piano sounds with the keyboard. You could play drums, you could play horns, you could play violin, string instruments, brass instruments, anything with just a MIDI keyboard. As far as recommendations go, we first have to know how big you want your keyboard to be. So usually they come in 25, 49, 61, or 88. The one I mainly use is an 88 key. That's also because I'm a piano player and I like that hammer feel. Whereas there are some people who like travel size keyboards, things that could fit in their backpack, like the 25 key Akaya. A good starting point is either a 49 key or a 61 key. The ones I recommend from a cheaper standpoint are the M Audio keyboards. They have the 88 key, the 61 key, and also the 49 key. And when it comes to travel size keyboard, again, I recommend the Akaya Pro. They come in different colors. I just prefer the white and black. And if your budget allows and you want sort of like the Lamborghini of MIDI keyboards, you could look into the Native Instruments keyboards. I'm also doing a review on that, so make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. But I prefer their keyboards because they have more functions to their disposal. In the end of the day, any of these keyboards will work. It doesn't matter whether it's the Lamborghini of MIDI keyboards or just a cheap one, they all work. Remember, the main focus is just to focus on making music. The sixth gear you need is an interface. Now, the main purpose of an interface is literally just to take external sound and convert it to digital form. An example of that, I will plug in my guitar, which is the external sound. I plug in my cable to the interface, and in my software, I'll click record. Now, anytime I play on my guitar, it's all of a sudden in my computer, and that's the purpose of the interface. When it comes to recommendations, it depends on your budget. If your budget is a lot lower, I recommend sticking with Focusrite just because their interfaces is just as great for a cheaper price. But if your budget allows for a higher end interface, then I recommend something like the Universal Audio, which is my personal favorite. They have the Solo, the Aero, the Twin, and then they also have the Rax, which is the one I use. The seventh gear you need is a microphone. Now, there are different type of microphones. There's ribbon, there's condensers, there's dynamic, and there's also different pickup patterns like hypercardioid, cardioid, supercardioid. I will be making a simplified video on the types of microphones and also their pickup patterns. A cardioid pattern just means it's gonna pick up any sound that comes in front of it and ignore everything else behind it. And then there's a condenser mic, which is just a lot more richer for recording purposes. So if you combine a richer microphone plus a microphone pattern that picks up anything from front of it, that's all you need. And that's why I say all you really need is a condenser microphone that has a cardioid pattern. The recommendations also depend on your budget, but I would recommend the ATH 2020, the ATH 2035, and the very popular Shure SM7B. Now, when you get the SM7B, make sure you get it with the loud lifter. I don't think people realize you need to use these together. Without the cloud lifter, it's literally gonna sound very low when you're talking. It's gonna sound really, really low. But when you have the cloud filter, it's all of a sudden so damn loud. Was that necessary? It really wasn't. Another popular one is the Neumann TLM 102 or the 103. This is the AKG C214, or also my personal favorite, the C414. And then there's the Neumann U87, also another personal favorite is the Manley. The ones I recommend from Blue microphones is the Blue Baby Bottle or the Bluebird. Last but not least is the 8th gear, which are speakers. When it comes to speakers, they come in different sizes. The cone usually on the bottom is the bass frequency. And what I always recommend is, depending on your room size, should depend on the type of speaker you get. If you have a super small room, you should not be having huge, massive, bass heavy speakers. It's not a club in your room unless you run a club in your room. The smaller your room, the smaller the speakers need to be. The bigger the room, the bigger your speakers need to be, which only makes sense. You can't rock small speakers in a freaking huge club. Vice versa, if you're in a very super small room and then you got like huge club speakers, you're definitely gonna get a noise complaint. Just like you could imagine, the reason why we need music production speakers is similar to the headphones. We want a flat frequency response. And in my opinion, only one really does a really great job at it. I'm sure some people might disagree with me, but this is just my opinion. It's the Yamaha speakers. These are hands down industry standard. They've been around for years. A lot of major studios have them. In fact, they used to be called the NS10s, but these are the more modified ones and more modern ones. And the ones are my personal favorite because they just do so well. You mix almost anything on this, you produce anything on this, it's gonna sound great almost everywhere else. If the price is too steep for you, sure, you could go ahead and get M Audio speakers or something cheaper around those lines. But in my opinion, it's best to save up just for the speakers, because this will be the only speaker pair you need to buy. So why not just save up money and invest in it? So like I promised you guys, I'll let you know the one thing I really wish I knew when I first got started. I really wish that when I first started, I focused more on improving my skills rather than the gear. I wasted about 2 to 3 years just gear chasing, and my music was the same. The moment I decided to focus on just improving my skills and being unstoppable, and any gear I touch from the list, I'll be able to produce anything. That's when my music turned around and new opportunities came. I got signed as a producer. Everything just took off. The best approach is to focus on the first 4 gears I mentioned and take off with it. When you get more money from the music, then you could get at the other things step by step. Your attention should be just to get so good, so unstoppable, where gear is not a problem for you and you could do anything. Don't forget, in the description below, I put the links to all the products I recommended. And also, if you found any value from this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.